Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I see we've got quite a few people streaming in this morning. It's great to see your faces from afar. I know some of us are here in Oregon and others across the country and even in other countries. So thank you for being with us in what is the morning on the Pacific Coast. And I'd just like to welcome you all to this special session with the SEC on raising capital for investors, hosted here by Oregon Rain. To introduce myself, my name is Alicia Leduc. I'm an attorney here in Oregon with Davis Wright Tremaine. I also serve as the treasurer on the board for Oregon Rain. And I serve on the board of Rain because I truly believe in its mission and in the efficacy of the work that Rain is doing. My background prior to law is in finance and specifically in access to capital. And I see as the treasurer, Rain's work making concrete leaps in addressing gaps for entrepreneurs, particularly rural entrepreneurs, and meaningfully connecting entrepreneurs with access to capital and resources so that their businesses can thrive here in Oregon. For example, Rain has successfully deployed state and federal grants to start a seed fund investing in rural entrepreneurs in Oregon. They've also launched a program using grant money to start a maritime focus and helping rural entrepreneurs on Oregon's coast participate in the blue economy more effectively and grow their businesses. They also currently have a grant pending for a sprint grant to enable crowdfunding for even more entrepreneurs in rural economies in Oregon. Rain has a proven and replicable community-oriented model of growing and sustaining entrepreneurial ecosystems in Oregon, and we continue to be open and willing to work with other communities, both in Oregon and throughout the country and other countries, on hosting our model and coming to talk about how that might work in other places. And you can feel free to contact Rain directly. We'll have some contact information at the end of this presentation if you're interested in learning more about how Rain can work in other communities. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We're happy to make this content available to you, and we're honored to host the SEC staff and commissioner to bring you today's event. And so without further ado, I'd like to thank our special guest speakers today, Commissioner Carolyn Crenshaw of the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, and then Jenny Choi and Jenny Regal of the Office of the Advocate for Small Business Capital Formation. Thank you, SEC, for sharing your time and expertise with us today. We really appreciate you being here and are honored to host you. So it's my pleasure to introduce SEC Commissioner Carolyn Crenshaw. She was appointed to the Securities and Exchange Commission by President Trump in August 2020. And prior to being appointed, she had a successful career as a staff attorney with the SEC, overseeing financial institutions, as well as prior to that working in private practice around capital and financial markets here in the United States. Her work has increasingly focused on strengthening investor protections and recently in addressing the devastating impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has had disproportionate impacts on small businesses, and particularly on businesses owned by women and people of color. She's leading efforts in finding ways to address the structural imbalances in the capital markets in order to increase access to capital for entrepreneurs, especially those underrepresented. And we are just very honored and happy to host you today. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Commissioner. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you all for having me here today. And thank you, Alicia, for that kind introduction. I feel like I don't need to say anything else after that. Those are really my goals and my focus, but it really is great to be here, and I wish I could actually be with all of you in Oregon or wherever you are, given that some of you are in Oregon, some of you are elsewhere. But before I really start, I do have to give my obligatory disclaimer that my remarks here today are my own and do not reflect the opinions of the Securities and Exchange Commission or its staff or any of my fellow commissioners. And so, I just want to say, you probably all don't know a whole lot about me, but I am a passionate lover of Oregon. My family is from Oregon. My mother grew up in Oregon. My grandmother was a school teacher in Eugene. My grandfather taught at the University of Oregon. And for nearly 20 years, I spent every summer in Eugene picking blackberries off the bush that grew along the fence in the backyard and going to my grandmother's favorite ice cream store down the street, Prince Puckler's, for those of you who know Eugene. And so it's really great to be here with a lot of Oregonians talking about how to raise capital and support small businesses. And I do want to thank Oregon REIN, as well as the SEC's Office of the Advocate for Small Business Capital Formation, that one's a mouthful, for hosting this event. I also want to thank all of you entrepreneurs who are taking the time away from your work to participate in this vital discussion. I understand that you come from a variety of perspectives. For some of you, this is your first interaction with the Commission and maybe an introduction to the securities laws. I understand others of you have offered securities to investors, and some have even thought about an IPO. No matter what your background, welcome, and I'm pleased to be here. And I'm here, Alicia alluded to this, but I'm here because I am passionate about promoting the Commission's three-part mission. For those of you who don't know, that mission is to promote capital formation, protect investors, and to maintain fair, orderly, and efficient markets. And for the SEC to be successful in carrying out its mission, it's important that we engage with actual market participants from different parts of the country, including entrepreneurs like yourselves. And it's important that we hear about both the successes and the challenges that you've experienced as market participants, so that we can consider those experiences and as we think about whether the system is actually working. And I know firsthand that it is essential for the Commission to have the benefit of this viewpoint. My brother started his own business really just before the pandemic started. He owns a small business developing 3D printing technology for military uses. He's the sole proprietor. So as you know, the receptionist, the IT guy, the consumer service rep, and the CEO all in one. And listening to my brother has given me additional insight and perspective into just how challenging it can be to start a business, let alone run one. And my brother's experiences and yours provide valuable perspective as I work with my colleagues at the Commission on how we can best unite job-creating capital with entrepreneurs, while also protecting investors. So I really look forward to hearing from you today and really appreciate your willingness to make the time to be here. And before I turn it over to Corey of Oregon REIN, I want to touch on a couple of topics that I am particularly interested in and that I hope you will think about today and, if you're willing, share your views on. First, Oregon REIN's mission focuses in part on catalyzing entrepreneurial ecosystems at the local level. I think that fostering local businesses and local business networks where entrepreneurs can learn from one another and advocate as a group is critical. From my work at the Commission and the time I've spent with our experts in the SEC's Small Business Advocacy Office, I know that an entrepreneur's experience is varied and individual. Your stories are all your own. You depend on your local communities just as they depend on you. So where you are very much affects your experience, including whether you obtain capital through a bank loan, from a professional investment fund, or from a group of local investors. And for me to do my job, and for our Small Business Advocacy Office staff to do theirs, we need data. We especially need data about securities offerings, including from the perspectives of entrepreneurs and investors. So I'm particularly interested in hearing from you on whether you have had success in raising capital, or whether you've experienced obstacles. It's important for us to know if there is a particular funding resource or avenue that works well in your community, or if you feel, or one that you feel is unavailable to you. If you've had experience conducting or advising clients in private offerings or IPOs, have you looked at the resources and the information offered on the Commission's website? If so, were they helpful? If not, why not? And is there other information that would be helpful for us to provide? Second, you probably know that an important part of starting business is who you know, although my brother, I think, would hotly dispute that premise, which is why it's great that Oregon REIN's mission, I think, is on connecting entrepreneurs to networks. I think that's really critical, and including overlooked entrepreneurs. If you haven't reviewed the Small Business Advocacy Office's annual report from 2020, I highly recommend it. It goes through in significant detail the systemic disparities in our financial markets, including the ways in which underrepresented founders, including women, minorities, and those from rural communities, face greater challenges in raising capital. And we all know that COVID has had a devastating impact on capital raising. And the Small Business Advocacy Office's report finds that the pandemic has had a disparate impact on businesses owned by women and minorities. The disparities in funding access are stark and not new. And I'm interested in hearing your views on what the Commission can do to address these issues, including on whether existing COVID relief measures are working and how we can better highlight or improve the resources the Commission provides to you and to the public through its website. I also encourage you to share any and all ideas you have as to what the Commission can do to improve access to funding for historically underrepresented groups. So before I close, I just want to share one final thought for those of you considering taking on investors. As an entrepreneur, you confront risk every day. It's part of the challenges and joy in running your own business. But as you plan to take on investors, it's important to take on the right investors and to ensure they understand the risks they are signing on to. The better your investors understand your business as it exists today and where you hope to take it, and the better they understand the risks involved and the terms of their investment, the better prospects you have for forming a long-term investment relationship. Good quality disclosures benefit the issuer and the investor. And as I said earlier, I'm really looking forward to hearing what is on your mind today, but I also hope you find the information that the staff provides today useful. The goal is that you come away with a better understanding of our securities laws and how they work, as well as the resources that are available to you. So without further ado, thank you very much. I'm thrilled to be here again, and I will turn it over to Mr. Wright.
Awesome. Thank you, Commissioner Crenshaw. We're happy to have you here, and yeah, really appreciate those things that you highlighted. All right, so let me share my screen here. And while I'm doing that, I want to apologize to all of you because you're stuck with me today. Normally, our CEO would be sharing and talking with you, but she had something come up. And so here I am. My name, let's see. Can you guys all see my slides, though? Give me a quick thumbs up. Yeah, sweet. All right. So my name is Corey Wright. I'm a venture catalyst with Oregon Rain. I'm also an entrepreneur, have a couple different companies. Had a couple successes and a lot of failures. And so I use mostly the failures to help other entrepreneurs start businesses. But let's do some quick housekeeping. If you don't mind, go ahead and go to the participants button, and then over your own name, you can click to rename yourself, your first, last name, organization, role. That just helps all of us sort of know who's on the call and have a little bit more of a sense of a actual in-person meeting, since we're all here on Zoom. Just wanted to remind everyone that this session is being recorded, and both RAIN and the SEC may post it to various different social media channels or online avenues, things like that. So keep that in mind. And also some quick virtual etiquette. We're going to keep everyone muted, but if you have questions during the Q&A part, go ahead and use the raise hand feature, which is also under the participants button over probably to the right of your screen. And then we'll allow you to unmute and you can ask your questions. You can also post questions in the chat. The SEC team and the RAIN team are monitoring that. And just two other things. Remember, this isn't a place to market your services, but it's rather a place to learn. So I encourage all of you to have sort of a learning attitude and also to be really inclusive and supportive of everyone here. And in the spirit of getting all of you sort of engaging, you know, normally we'd be doing this with like a beer in a pub somewhere and having a talk about securities, but instead we're doing it on Zoom. So go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat, share something you're excited to learn about while I'm going through this part real quick. The agenda for today is we're just going to do a quick, you're going to introduce yourself, who you are. We're going to do a quick overview of RAIN, and then I'm going to hopefully speak as little as possible, and we're going to turn it over to the SEC team, the two Jennies, or Jenny squared as I like to call them. And they're going to share some information, and then you're going to get to talk to them and ask questions, and then we'll close with a couple next steps and go from there. There's a lot of entrepreneurs here, which is awesome. There's a bunch of last minute attendees, so this isn't like the most perfect information, but we've got a lot of different folks here, government, legal, support organizations, some students, but lots of entrepreneurs. And so we're always excited to see that. Looks like only about 15% of you have maybe participated in a capital raise in the last 12 months, which means that the rest of you can really learn all the ins and outs. So you can do a great job this year in raising capital. So as I mentioned, I'm a venture catalyst, and RAIN's mission is really just to partner with communities to catalyze ecosystems, really we're connectors within communities. And the reason we do this work is we want, especially small and rural communities, to have prosperous economies. We want to see local leaders value, celebrate, and support entrepreneurs, that leaders understand that you guys are the primary creator of net new jobs. And that's from a Kaufman report several years ago. We want to see you have thriving economies, and most importantly, that a culture of possibilities is embraced, that anyone, no matter who they are, can say, I have a business idea, and then be provided the tools and resources to, as we like to say, either scale fast or fail fast, right? And hopefully either grow a business or figure out maybe there's not a market fit and move on to the next idea that you'll have. So one of the main ways we support entrepreneurs, we connect them to people. So that could be a co-founder, a mentor, a subject matter expert, someone at the SEC's office, right? Programs, accelerators, small business development center courses, physical assets. Maybe you need a 3D printer. Maybe you need a commercial kitchen in the bottom of a church building in the middle of a town somewhere, and we know about it, and you can go start making your food product there, right? Could be a broad variety of things. And then of course, capital is really important. A lot of the different members of the RAIN team have experience raising capital. For me, it's through crowdfunding via Kickstarter. We have angel investors, and we know a lot of different folks in the area that can help you get money to make money. So that's sort of the entrepreneur side. But then the other aspect of our work that often can get lost or glossed over in all the interactions with entrepreneurs is sort of this ecosystem building part. But it's really important, as the commissioner mentioned, that entrepreneurs are really surrounded with an entire support network. And that can be a ton of different areas. It can be media, it can be education, it can be other entrepreneurs, capital, all of these different things. And so, our goal is that you're surrounded, you have the resources you need, and that's why we're hosting today's event, which is focused on the capitals piece, because we want to see more capital activated in Oregon and other communities. And of course, the goal with all of that is that you have this awesome, happy picture of smiling faces. This is from one of our recent programs, and that you are supported and can grow your business. Just a quick shout out. I wanted to thank all of the communities that support Oregon RAIN across Oregon. As always, if you know someone from one of these cities or departments, please tell them thank you. Also, just wanted to highlight that Oregon RAIN is really thankful. The EDA has given us 2 different grants. One was used to catalyze a seed fund with our programmatic partners, Cascade Seed Fund, which they launched that. I think they raised multiple millions and have even started deploying capital in the last 12 months. And then recently, we're super excited. We got to bring our new Blue Economy Innovation Catalyst, Laura Ferguson, to the team. And she's working with Oregon State and the Hatfield Marine Science Center to basically develop blue innovation, especially related to marine technology. So wanted to thank the EDA and the federal government for those 2 grants. All right, so guess what? You get to be done listening to me. I'm going to now turn it over to Jenny Regal, and she's going to share some slides. So thanks, everyone. If you have any questions, of course, put them in the chat, and then I'll wrap things up at the end. Jenny?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Commissioner Crenshaw, as well as Alicia and Corey and everyone here at Oregon RAIN for hosting and facilitating this discussion. And thank you for everyone on this Zoom call for joining this conversation. And I want to reiterate that we really do want this to be an active dialogue. So please join in with your questions and feedback and perspective here today. So I'm Jenny Regal, and I'm at an office at the SEC with an exceptionally long title. As we've already kind of pointed out, it's the Office of the Advocate for Small Business Capital Formation. And as background, just so you know a little bit about me, before coming to the SEC, I practiced at a large law firm in Silicon Valley working on capital raising, everything from seed stage through IPO, through public company disclosures and transactions. While at the SEC, I worked on those same reviewing public company disclosures and transactions, as well as helping write the rules to change policy in response to feedback that was provided to the staff and the commission, and now to advocating for small businesses and their investors. And I feel so fortunate to be in this role, to be here and have the opportunity to engage in discussions like we're having here today. With that, I need to give the standard SEC disclaimer that the views expressed by myself, any other staff, or commissioner here today are our own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the entire commission. Before we dive into the rules, though, I'd love to give you some background on our office and what we're seeking to do. So our office is a relatively new startup itself. We started in January of 2019. We were created by Congress with almost unanimous bipartisan support. And this unanimous support recognized the fact that there's this gap between the role of small businesses in creating jobs, innovations, and wealth, and the accessibility of capital to meet those expectations, hence the need for advocates. We have a particular focus on addressing the unique challenges faced by women and minority-owned investors in businesses, rural businesses, and businesses affected by natural disasters and their investors. To do that, we're taking a proactive approach to engaging small businesses and their investors across the country. As Commissioner Crenshaw noted in her remarks, we're also seeking to highlight the challenges, successes, and trends that we're seeing throughout the small business market in our annual report. We'll highlight a small portion of that data here today, but I recommend you take a look at our annual report for so much more data. And I am going to share my screen, so apologies for, can everyone see my screen? Excellent. So essentially, in a nutshell, our office is here to help by working with small businesses and investors, and we want to advocate for you. So to do that, you need to tell us your story and reach out and engage in this dialogue. I'll now turn it over to Jenny to dive into some of the common terms startups should be aware of when raising capital.
Thanks, Jenny. Hi, my name is Jenny Choi, and our office has been really looking forward to this discussion, and I'm excited to be here. To give you a quick background on myself, before joining the SEC, I was at law firms in New York City, where I worked on various capital raising transactions, including IPOs and different types of registered and unregistered offerings. I also advise public companies on their ongoing reporting obligations, corporate governance issues, and ESG matters. And at the SEC, I've been working closely with various industry players, including small businesses and their investors, and facilitating the understanding of how certain regulations and policies may impact small businesses. So before Jenny talks about specific pathways of capital raising that are available for startups, we thought it would be helpful to go over some of the common terms that you may encounter as you're going through capital raising. Also, our office recently launched a webpage called Cutting Through the Jargon, where we define and included additional resources for certain terms, including the ones that we're going to go over today. So check out our website, www.sec.gov/OASB, and click Cutting Through the Jargon on the left column. So before we dive into 5 common terms that you should be aware of when you try to raise capital, I want to take a step back and look at common sources of capital for small businesses. Simply put, small businesses rely on 3 sources: money the business makes, personal money the founders put into the business, and money from outside sources. But the first 2 options are often available to either established companies or high net worth individuals. And with respect to money from outside sources, as this chart shows, loans take a big portion. Yet if you take an even closer look into bank financing, collateral is often a requirement for small businesses. And frankly, small businesses may not have enough collateral or other performance track records to borrow money from the banks. In fact, as you can see in this slide, minority-owned businesses face greater challenges accessing bank capital for a number of reasons. So while investor capital is only a small portion of outside capital for small businesses, it is an important one to understand. And with this background in mind, let's dive into 5 common terms involving investment capital raising. First one is security. So when you have investors invest in your company, you'll often hear the term security. Security is defined broadly and is often very complex, but essentially it's an instrument used for investment, such as stock, bond, or investment contracts. And perhaps it might be helpful to start with what is not a security. So let's say you want to start a business and you apply for a grant from an organization that likes to help startups to grow. And as the organization gives you a grant, you have no obligations to pay back any profits that you generate from your business. Now that grant is not a security. And another common example of something that is not a security is a bank loan that we just discussed earlier. So what would be an example of a security? You may often hear about an IPO, which stands for Initial Public Offering, and how someone purchased 10 shares of XYZ company stock. That stock is a security. Other terms you may hear like equity, convertible debt, shares, or membership interests, also all are examples of securities. So now that we briefly covered what security is, where exactly does the SEC come into play? Well, one of the things that the SEC does is it regulates how securities are offered and sold. And in particular, US securities laws require that every offer or sale of a security must be registered or have an exemption from registration. And so we call an offer or sale of a security that requires registration with the SEC a registered offering. An IPO is one type of a registered offering. And some of you mentioned on the Eventbrite forum that you'd like to cover IPO process. But for more details, we actually encourage you to visit our website where you will find resources on how to raise capital on the left column, which will take you to going public section. But generally speaking, we've seen many companies go public once they're in a very late stage of their development, partly because IPO requires a lot of planning and it is costly. Now, an exempt offering is an offering of a security that doesn't require registration with the SEC. You may also hear some people refer to it as private offering. Our conversation today will be focused on exempt offerings, and Jenny will walk us through the specific exempt offerings that you may be able to use to raise capital. Finally, as Jenny goes through different types of exempt offerings, you'll hear a term accredited investor. An accredited investor is a type of investor who meets certain criteria and can invest in exempt offerings. And because some of these exempt offerings actually require only accredited investors to invest money, those who qualify as accredited investors often determine who can access portions of the private capital markets that many small businesses depend on to grow. Now, for the first time, wealth or income is not the only qualification for an individual to be considered an accredited investor. The definition now includes certain investment professionals, and the public can also propose to the Commission additional qualifications by emailing investorcredentials@sec.gov. Now, if you want to learn more about the specific wealth or income threshold and what professional criteria are required to qualify as accredited investors, as I mentioned before, check out our webpage, Cutting Through the Jargon. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jenny to go into more details about exempt offerings.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jenny. So let me switch the slides. So before we dive into the exemptions, I want to talk about what types of offering companies are using to raise investment capital. So if you've ever tried to raise investment capital, you may have encountered that there are multiple different pathways available. Regulatory requirements often influence how much and how often those pathways are used. This slide graphically shows you how much capital is raised via those different pathways. The bubbles here are scaled to the amount of capital raised, with private offerings in navy and registered offerings in orange. You will notice here that there are three frontrunners: registered offerings, 506B private placements, and other exempt offerings, which are largely statutory traditional private placements. Often market participants refer to these two categories simply as private offerings. These are typically how angel and venture capital investments are made. Angel investors are wealthy people who make many investments in early stage companies. As discussed in our annual report and noted by Commissioner Crenshaw earlier, angel investors typically invest in businesses located close by. So the difference between a lead investor and the target business averages only about 37 miles. Venture funds are investment companies that make professional investments, so often in larger dollar amounts. As discussed in our annual report, 70% of venture capital funds are concentrated in 3 metro areas. So the other newer offering types, such as crowdfunding, accredited investor crowdfunding under Rule 506C, and Reg A mini IPOs are much smaller in comparison, given the familiarity within the market and other requirements for the offerings. So each of these exemptions permit offerings over the internet. As discussed in our annual report, so looking at what's happening in Oregon, there were 3 reported Reg crowdfunding deals with a primary location in Oregon. This is looking at data from July 1, 2019 through June 30, 2020. There were 0 Regulation A offerings in Oregon during this time. And this compares to the over 250 Reg D offerings that occurred over that same time period. So it kind of gives you a sense of who was using what options. So before we turn to a chart that may make your eyes hurt, but trust me, we'll get through it and I'll walk through examples. One important concept that I wanted to introduce is general solicitation. So most companies can sell and advertise their products anywhere, from billboards to the internet. The most utilized offering types, which are the two biggest Navy circles on this slide, however, prohibit companies from advertising their sale of securities to the public. So if you had an idea to start a social media campaign to raise money from investors and you haven't thought through your investment pathway, pause, call a lawyer, because you may be limiting the ways that you're able to raise capital. So now let's turn to the offerings. So I completely realize that this chart is a lot, so don't get overwhelmed. We know from countless conversations with founders and investors who are incredibly smart and running successful companies and investment operations that the securities landscape is not intuitive and our rules are complex. This is a chart that we prepared to summarize the changes adopted by the Commission in late 2020 as part of the Capital Formation Adopting Release. We're going to help break these down, and we welcome questions and feedback as we discuss. So turning to a slightly less intimidating slide, we know that companies don't often think about how to raise capital by what exemption or particular securities pathways available, but rather they evaluate the practical options available for their company. To help simplify that prior chart, I'll discuss 5 different types of exempt offerings, highlighting several of the factors that we hear are most important to companies in choosing what path to take. So these include the offering types that you highlighted in your registration for this event. Let's start at the top. The most significant commonality across the 2 Navy boxes in the top row is that these offerings are largely limited to accredited investors. Given the restrictions, there are no limits on the offering amounts or how much an investor can invest. And our rules only require a notice filing with some basic information that is not reviewed by the staff. There are also important differences between the 2 offerings. So let's look at that private placements, that 506B offering. So this is, again, the most commonly used exemption. It was one of those big Navy circles that we saw in the prior couple of slides. The 2 takeaways here that I wanted to highlight: the term private placement generally means that you can't go out and broadly advertise this offering. This is most frequently used when a company has access to an existing network of potential accredited investors. In practice, these offerings have overwhelmingly been limited to accredited investors, while a small number of sophisticated investors are allowed to participate in the offering. If a single non-accredited investor does participate, those investors need to be provided with written disclosures about the transaction and the company, including financial statements. This is only occurring in less than 3% of these offerings, so it's not frequent. One other change I wanted to highlight here is an additional recent change that's going to become effective next month. So some of you may have heard about demo days. These are events that are sponsored by an angel group, university, or similar group that invite companies to present their products and business to potential investors with the aim of securing an investment. There's always been a question if these events would then cause the offering not to be a, quote, private placement. Again, this most commonly used exemption. The guidance, which will be effective next month, provides clarity on when these events will be considered within the requirements of a private placement. So going back to the chart, and the other Navy square there at the top is the Accredited Investor Crowdfunding Rule 506C. So the 2 takeaways here that I wanted to highlight: as the term crowdfunding infers, you can go out and broadly advertise your offering to find investors, but all your investors must be accredited, and the company needs to take reasonable steps to verify that all investors are accredited. So let's now move down to the 2 gray boxes at the bottom. Let's start with the commonalities. These offerings do not restrict who can invest in the offering and allow you to also go out and broadly advertise and solicit investors for your offering. There are, however, limits on how much investors can invest in these offerings. Now, for the difference between the 2 gray squares, first, I'll start with crowdfunding, or Reg CF. Remember what we're talking about, taking a step back to kind of how Jenny started. we're talking about securities-based crowdfunding. So something that involves an investment in the company. So donation-based crowdfunding or awards-based crowdfunding that does not involve a security, and again, that investment would not need to comply with these rules. So if you are looking to comply, and it is a securities-based crowdfunding offering that you're looking to, an offering disclosure document with financial statements is required to be filed with SEC, but is not reviewed by SEC staff. The offering must be conducted through a registered intermediary, which could be either a registered funding portal or a registered broker-dealer. And given the potential for any investor to participate without SEC staff review, offerings are limited to just over $1 million, which increases to $5 million in March of 2021. So now looking at Regulation A mini IPOs, the other gray box. The takeaway here is that I think people would want to be aware of are, it requires an offering disclosure document with financial statements to be filed with SEC. It is reviewed by SEC staff, and it must be qualified before sales can commence. Given this staff review, however, offerings are permitted to raise up to $50 million, and this threshold increases to $75 million in March of 2021. So lastly, the orange box on the screen, intra-state offerings. Now, there's a reason I chose such a bright color, because these are different, right? This is an exemption that largely defers to the state. Essentially, when you have an in-state business and in-state investors, our federal rules defer to state laws for the offering limits and how a business communicates with those investors. However, being a lawyer, please keep in mind we are not Oregon lawyers. So if this is something that you are interested in, we recommend that you reach out to your Oregon State securities regulator as well as a local securities lawyer. So before we dive into a few examples, I wanted to again thank you for joining us today. As you consider different options for your business, I encourage you to make sure you fully understand how the offerings work and seek information from reliable sources like the SEC. One additional important point that goes beyond the rules themselves, and this is a point that Commissioner Crenshaw made in her remarks. When looking for an investor, you need to not only consider who may have the money or the interest in investing, but also the right risk tolerance and objectives for your company. Your investors can become the long-term owners of the company, and the relationship really needs to be a right fit for both the company and your investors. So with that, let's turn it to some questions.
Great, thanks, Jenny. So yeah, we thought it might be helpful to walk through a few questions on how Oregon companies may use different capital raising options. So as you can see on the slide, the first question is, how does someone in Oregon go about raising $200,000 for a coffee shop? And now this question is open to you all, and feel free to chat in with your answers. But in the meantime, Jenny, do you mind getting us started?
I am happy to, and I'm going to do my best to watch the chat as well as answer. It's like walking and chewing gum at the same time, right? So I think our brains often think to investment capital raising because that's what we look at the SEC. But as Alicia mentioned in the beginning, there are other options. There's grants that she discussed through kind of work that they've done with Oregon Rain, but also where Jenny Choi started the event talking about bank loans. So there are things like grants or bank loans that a company may want to consider outside of investment capital raising. But looking to investment capital raising, one thing that a company may want to consider is that most commonly used exemption, that 506B private placement. That could be an option that they may want to start at.
Right. But as you mentioned, Jenny, you talked about how private placements are usually you need to have like a network of accredited investors. So what about, people who are in a situation where they don't have a network of accredited investors? What are some other routes that folks can take?
Absolutely. And that is that we find that there are a lot of businesses out there that don't have this access to a network of accredited investors. So looking at the securities laws, and I see in the chat, you would probably need savings, loans, friends and family for a coffee shop. That's absolutely. So looking at kind of your options outside of the securities laws, as well as looking at potential options with a 506B private placement. But if those aren't available to you, you could look at 506C, which is basically your accredited investor crowdfunding. Looking if you wanted to generally solicit. Another option, which I didn't go into the weeds on, that someone suggested is a a Rule 504 offering. And so this is basically a regional offering exemption. The threshold for what you could raise is currently at 5 million. The rules, which will be effective next month, will increase that to 10 million. This is one that also is a collaboration with the state. So there will be state requirements in addition to SEC requirements, but it's most certainly an option that a company should be considering when it's looking at those options, or looking at kind of how it would want to raise capital. Other things that it may want to consider is reg crowdfunding. So it does fit within the crowdfunding limits, and you could go out and generally solicit. Another that I would want to highlight here is intra-state. So it being a coffee shop, it may have a local following, and the company may want to reach out to their Oregon State Securities Regulator and talk about their interest-rate crowdfunding available options. But at a federal level, that because the rules are largely deferred to the state, there wouldn't be particular federal requirements that are present.
Right. And what about, if someone wants to raise like a large amount of money, let's say $15 million?
That's true. And to go back in the chat, Wilson raised the fact that the challenge with a coffee shop is the potential for growth. Investors are going to need attractive returns. And this is definitely a good point. You would need to make sure that investor expectations for that company are aligning with what the business objectives are, and making sure that the investors that are investing are really the right fit for the business, and make sure that the security that it's seeking to offer, whether it's a debt-based security or whether an equity-based security, there's an alignment of objectives and where the business wants to go. So it isn't just a securities law question. It really is kind of what is a good fit for the company. And looking at the $15 million, one option could be looking at that 506B private placement, or again, looking at kind of if it wanted to seek accredited investors but didn't have that network, potentially doing a 506C accredited investor crowdfunding. Another option could be Regulation A, since it's over the crowdfunding threshold, but under the Regulation A threshold. And so one of the questions in the chat, it looks like, goes into offering stock for employees. And there are exemptions available. Rule 701 is often used. There's resources on our website that walk through kind of what options are available. We know that companies often want to consider those options, and I don't want to take over Corey and Alicia's job in moderating, so I don't want to go too much in there, but I was trying to look for if people wanted to weigh in on these hypotheticals. But with that, unless others have questions now, I'll turn it over to Corey and Alicia to kind of help moderate questions and see what people want to discuss.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Jenny. Thanks for sharing all of that information. So yeah, now is the time for you guys to speak. So go ahead and use the raise hand feature. If your question's been answered, go ahead and unraise your hand so that other people can ask a question. As a reminder, if you click participants, which is at the bottom left of your screen, then at the top right of your screen, I don't understand Zoom's UI, but that's how it is. You should be able to click a little raise hand feature, and that will allow us to unmute you and you can ask your question. So let's see, anything yet? Not yet. Jenny, you did an amazing job. I guess there's no more questions. We can all go home.
Well, I don't mean this as a threat, but if others don't have questions for us, I certainly have questions for you. I want to hear about how capital raising is working and not working in Oregon. I guess I'll wait for someone to come up, but if people want to share in the chat or come online to talk about it, I would love to hear about, capital available within Oregon. So is there the capital that you need to grow your business? Is it available within your community? And if it's not, where do you go?
All right, it looks like a couple people are having issues with the raise hand feature. So while we're figuring that out, I think Dr. Let's see, make sure I find the right person. Was it Dr. Angela? Did you have a question? I think you did. So here, I'm gonna ask you to unmute. Go ahead and ask your question.
actually, I didn't have a question.
Oh, sorry. Maybe it was the wrong
No, that's
person.
okay. I introduced myself earlier. That may have been what you saw.
Corey, it looks like David Montgomery has a question, and then after that, Carl Niedner.
Okay, there's some hands coming through. All right, so yeah, David, go for it. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just curious. There is exemption from registration under the Securities Act of 1933, right, for charities doing a offering to their members. And then under the Advisors Act, there's an exemption for charities similarly situated. There's a charitable organizations exemption under the 1933 Act and the Investment Company Act in 1940. So couldn't we just raise money for our portfolio companies that fit our charitable objectives by creating a class of members for our charities and then offering stock to them, raise capital for our clients?
So that is an excellent question. And I am familiar with many elements of that, but I think what may be best is if you reach out to small business at sec.gov and we can discuss the specifics. We cannot give you legal advice on where, what you should be doing and how, what path you should take. But what we can do is help if you have interpretive questions about what's permissible or if a particular plan of action is permitted or not. We are happy to make some introductions and help connect you with the right staff to be able to get those interpretive detailed questions answered. Again, that's kind of what I would call our role as a cruise director, where you show up on the cruise and you want to go to a particular element. We can help kind of make sure that you're in touch with the right staff to get the right information for your question.
Okay, who should I contact?
So you can email smallbusiness@sec.gov and a member of our staff will get back to you and we'll set up a call to discuss or communicate over email. So happy to kind of learn more and let's be in touch.
Well, before I were to suggest such a course of action to anyone, I probably want to get a letter from your attorney saying that it's okay, right? Like a determination letter.
Well, let's talk. I mean, we can't talk about the details of kind of, I think we would need to get you in touch with the right staff to make sure that we're fully understanding what interpretive question you're looking for guidance on, and then what the best course of action for you to pursue from that point.
Right. Thanks, David.
Though. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe follow up in the chat, David. Let's go to the next question. Carl, you're up.
Carl, I think you're still muted.
Is that better?
Yeah,
much better.
Okay, 2 layers of muting there. And I think you may have just answered that with just.
Oh. Sorry, everyone. That is my bad. I accidentally just muted him. There's like a bazillion things here. So, Carl, go ahead again. Apologies, everyone.
All right. Thank you, Corey. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Jenny. And you may have just answered my question with send an email to smallbusiness@sec.gov. But the question on my mind isn't really directly related to raising capital for small business. We're a small software company, and we actually won an angel round a few years back. And now we find ourselves like we were completely innocent and naive when we did that, and it was kind of it's become a bit of a success disaster in that one of our original intents was to share the equity broadly through the company, and now we have some founders, and we have some external investors, and we have a bunch of employees, which kind of have the back end of some stock options, and we're kind of interested in possibly sharing the some of the original founding equity out among the employees broadly, not just traditional options, but some of the founding equity. And we kind of wish we had thought about that when we started. But when we talk to attorneys, they're like, "Oh my God, that's a terrible morass, and you'll go to jail for all eternity." Does the SEC have any pathways for doing that kind of thing, or is it really true that that's just not possible?
I think this may be a good question to talk over through at small business at SEC, so we can find out kind of the details of what you're looking to do, as well as kind of hear what potential concerns that you have with, the securities laws specifically. I think, again, we can't provide you legal advice on what you can or can't do, but we want you to know kind of where the legal rights are and the legal obligations are, and kind of what you need to know about the securities laws to move forward. But given this is such kind of a detailed, specific fact pattern, it's probably best kind of coordinated with our staff on a call that we're happy to set up if you shoot us an email to small business.
Okay. Are there particular sections of the code that deal with that kind of internal equity transfer that I can read ahead?
So you're talking, I think on the specifics on, I think it really is going to depend on your specific fact pattern that's available. So I would feel free to shoot us an email, and we can send you back some resources even before we set up a call to discuss. We can send you, there's links available that we can put in the chat on kind of generally how to raise capital and what exemptions are available, because any offer or sale of a security would trigger the securities laws. And so there's certain things that we could reach out ahead of time, but given the specifics, I would prefer to just talk separately.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks. I was muted. Let's go to Charlie next. And just a quick reminder, let's keep the questions pretty quick so that everyone gets a chance. And I can stay here as long as needed. I don't know when the SEC team needs to leave. And then also put follow-up questions in the chat as well, and we can work to address those down the road. So Charlie.
Hey, thanks, Corey. I'll try to be really brief on this one. And I know it's going to depend, so that's a given. But as we're on the fundraising pathway, what's a good amount of money to be budgeting for the legal fees that it's going to take to do all of this sort of filing and work like that, just so that we put that into our planning deck?
That is an excellent question, and it really does depend on what offering you're looking at doing. For example, if you're looking at your 506B, that private placement, that is the most commonly used exemption, while the SEC requirements are that you do just a general notice filing with the staff, filling out that Form D is just one element. That's the one kind of securities aspect. Market practice is that there's a private placement memorandum that's also done. That's not a specific securities law requirement, but it is a practice that many investors do want to see occurring in a transaction. There's also a number of different organizations that have sample documents out there that you can go ahead and look at and kind of see what the terms are. So if you walk into a transaction and you know what you're looking for and you know what your investor base and what would be a good fit for you, it's going to be a smoother transaction, right? Because you're going to have a better understanding of what the requirements for you and your company are. Whereas if you don't do your homework and you just walk into a meeting and you want a lawyer to walk you through all the different steps, it's gonna be a little bit more expensive, because they're gonna need to take the energy to explain what they see is the right fit for your company. There's also, something like a Regulation A, that mini IPO, because you do complete offering document file it with SEC. There is a staff review process, so you may get comments from the staff as well as qualification. And there are different kind of elements of that. So it really does vary on what type of offering that you're doing, as well as where you're seeking to go. I think our annual report does have some data as far as kind of that will give you a sense of kind of where the market is at. It doesn't have specific costs on how much a transaction is going to occur. Another place where it may be more expensive is, depending on the offering type, you may need reviewed financial statements, or you may need US GAAP financial statements. And all of those do come at a cost if you do not already have them available. Now, if you got a bank loan and they happen to require them under those circumstances, you don't have that expense. So it really does depend on kind of what you're looking for.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks for joining.
Great, thanks. Let's go to Dr. Kathy Hoyt. I know she was having some trouble later, so I want to make sure we give some of our female entrepreneurs a chance to speak as well. So go for it, Dr. Hoyt.
Okay. So first of all, I'm just going to say, I now know why there's a gap for women and minorities. I can't understand. You guys are talking in a language that is just flying right over my head. So I am completely frustrated at this point. I'm out in rural Oregon. I don't have a CFO. I can't afford the attorney to answer questions. How do I let people know I'm seeking funding? Was my question originally, because I keep being told, don't tell anybody you're seeking funding. It's against SEC policy. And I find that insane. It's like, I need to find funding, but I can't tell anybody I'm seeking funding. I come to this workshop, which I am so grateful for. Thank you, thank you, thank you. But now what I get is, there's so many options of how to get funding, and some of them say you can advertise and some of them you can't. My question now, who helps me figure out which of those options is right for our company, and can we advertise it? We have no CFO, we can't afford the attorney. Maybe Rain is the right place. I don't know, I'm lost. There you go.
Thank you for asking the question. These are excellent questions. And
thank you.
And this is good feedback for us. And this is something that we're working on. We have some educational resources on our website, and Jenny Choi highlighted some of the jargon, and that's kind of the first stage of this bigger plan to have more educational resources. So hearing this, and I'd love to hear from you. I will answer your question, but then I have a question for you, which is, and I'll give you a moment to think on it. It doesn't have to be a pop quiz, but what would be helpful as a resource? Would a video walking through resources and different avenues that helps better explain these things and practically what you need to know? Is it a cheat sheet with bullet points that kind of helps hone in on what you need to do? Is it just kind of better descriptions on how to choose an option? Now, we will never be able to give you legal advice and say, right, based on your company, you should choose path A. That is not something that we can do as securities regulators. And to be honest, I don't think you want the government telling that you need to take a particular path or not. So it is something that we are aware of, and we want people to know their options and know what's available. Ultimately, we won't be able to kind of step in and say, you should try X, Y, and Z. I know one thing I would mention.
I'm not looking for that so much as somebody to talk to. So, yeah, I didn't even know what an IPO was. I had to go look it up while you guys were all talking, and I'm thinking, okay, this is part of the gap, is the vocabulary is, I'm a psychologist. I'm not a financial person. So I'm going, where does one get the vocabulary in the first place to understand what you guys are even talking about? So it's not that I want somebody to tell me what to do. It's more, like you said, how can I get the information in a way? Like, I go to the SEC policies, it might as well be alien language. I cannot. And I have a PhD. I'm not a stupid person. So I'm frustrated. I'm sorry. I'm sharing my frustration today.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm happy to have it. My husband is an entrepreneur, so I get this, and he looks at me cross-eyed and says, "Stop talking in acronyms." So we really do our best to try to meet people where they're at and to understand where the confusion is, or where you need help learning the system. And I think one, we would love to hear further on what we can do to better communicate and to better explain this on our website so that people can get it. In the meantime, please reach out to us. We are happy to help be your resource and to help walk you through the options that are available and make sure that you understand the system. I've spent countless hours on the phone with investors and entrepreneurs like yourself that just, they don't, again, the system is complex and we know it. And I kind of joke about it in the slide that I showed, but we know it's difficult, but I think there's a positive that too, right? Because you have different capital raising options that are available to you. And so there's a positive in that that there are many different pathways that you could look at. But on the negative, we understand this is complex, and this is what I've done my whole career. And I'm happy, and all of our members of the team are very passionate about having people understand the securities laws and knowing what options are available.
When you
Kathy,
say us, who is us? Who's us?
Oh, the Office of Small Business Capital Formation. So it's small business at sec.gov.
Okay.
And with respect to the cutting through the jargon, Kathy, we're in the process of developing the webpage. So if you look through it and you say, hey, there are some topics that I'd like you guys to cover, we're definitely open to that feedback and would love to hear from you. And unfortunately, due to the time, I think we may have time for one more question, Jenny. Corey, I don't know who was next in line, but.
Yeah, so yeah, great points. The RAIN team is happy to stay on as long as there's discussion going, but if the SEC team or you guys need to leave, totally understand. I know there are a couple people in line, but just because diversity, equity, inclusion is so important for us, I'd love to hear from the other, I believe, female entrepreneur in the line, just so we get at least some equal things. And if we have extra time after that, we'll do the rest of the hands. So Aubrey, do you want to quickly, and then the rest can be follow-up later, ask your question?
Oh, wow, I'm honored. Thank you so much. And thanks to the panel. Thanks to the commissioner for stopping by. I'm glad to know that a fellow Oregonian is out there in Washington. So one of the things that I love to do is to go through a process that I'm supposed to be explaining and attempting to improve. And I wondered if anybody on the panel actually has started a small business from scratch and is actually first-handedly familiar with starting a business.
So I can speak for myself. I have not myself in my own professional experience, but my spouse has. He was doing something different and did leave his prior company and start his own company. And I saw him build it and struggle with employees and struggle with a lot of other different topics that are hard, right? I mean, the idea of being an entrepreneur, you wear every single hat imaginable, and it's difficult. And this is why we're here, and we want to support you and want to help, build that ecosystem so that you do feel like you have that support that you need.
Great, thanks. Jenny, either Jenny, do you guys have time to stay on a little longer, or do we need to wrap things up? What's your schedule?
How about one or two more questions, and then we do need to wrap things up, but we could take one or two more questions if we can.
Perfect, great. Larry, you've been waiting a while. Go for it. Quick question.
Okay, I'm unmuted. So, Corey, Alicia, Jenny, and Carolyn, thank you for being here today. And my question was about the Rule 701. You mentioned stock for employees. That's the thing. We've got some employees in Montana and Wyoming and places that are really doing some work for us, but we would like to reward them with stock. in the company, and I don't know how that's possible. But if there's any place I can look, I would like to look at it.
So absolutely. So there are options available, but the most commonly used exemption for a private company is an exemption called Rule 701. And there is information we can, maybe Julie can put it in the chat. So on our, we have a bunch of different resources about small business capital formation. And in it, it talks, one of the pages talks about Rule 701 and the options are available. There are, it does need to be to employees, and there are, particular requirements that I don't want to, get into today, especially when we just have a few minutes left, but there are options that are available. And there is information on the website that talks through kind of what are the particular requirements on how much you can sell over a particular period of time. And, there needs to be a plan in place and some of the basics of kind of what that means. But this is something that we could, again, connect you with the staff if you have a specific detailed question, or we could have a conversation if you email smallbusiness@sec.gov, and we can just walk you through kind of the resources that are available on our website.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for joining.
Thanks. All right, and let's do the last question and we'll wrap things up. Lynn, you should be able to unmute yourself.
My name is Lynn Blackstone. I'm in Cottage Grove, Oregon, population 10,000, so a rural market. Not in San Francisco, which shows the background, but I'm actually in my office. So I'm a real estate developer, a new real estate developer, and I started doing that basically to help entrepreneurs, because at the end of the day, they have to have a place to work. And so in a sense, created a for-profit incubator type of operation here. And Jenny, you had said you wanted to hear stories of what we're struggling with. So in the case here, I was looking for money to be able to take the biggest, ugliest building in downtown Cottage Grove and renovate it. My wife and I, we had just a few months left to pay off our house. At 64 years of age, we hawked the house for everything it was worth, took the money and bought the biggest, ugliest building in downtown Cottage Grove. And then we proceeded to look for funding. We ended up finding some hard money lending to be able to do the project, which cost us about $1.3 million at 10.5% interest, which is very expensive money. And when it came time to do the permanent financing, we were looking for funding. Well, here's, you hear the stories. Well, this is reality. I talked to 21 different banks and mortgage people about the project. And I was told time and again that if we were not in a rural market, the funding would be no problem whatsoever. And so because we're rural, because we're Cottage Grove, a population 10,000, even though we're only 20 minutes away from Eugene, we were unable to get funding. So we ended up having to do a bridge loan to keep us alive. Granted, it was influenced by the pandemic, but still the capital is really difficult to get. And so what I would, I have two suggestions for you. Number one is continue to do these. You may want to do smaller groups. I mean, my background for 40 years, I've been in new products and helping new companies start and big companies to grow. So I'm a marketing strategist by background. And the way that we went out is do lots of focus groups, lots of diets, triads, quads, and listen to customers. And you do that in small groups. I would really encourage you to do that. I would further encourage you to connect with other organizations, i.e. USDA, which is targeted to rural development, and the SBA. But here's a prime example. So USDA offers a program for loaning money to entities like myself, where it's 51% commercial. So it has to be 51% commercial, or they'll loan it for entities where the building is going to be residential or apartments, where 90% of it has to be residential. If you look at the downtowns, small towns today, they're either 2, 3, 4-story buildings. Well, if you think about the financial security, apartments are the very best and least risky of anything you build. And so in downtown, you'd want to build at least a 2-story where the top story is apartments. 3-story would be better, and even 4-story would be better, right? The problem is the better you get from a less risk standpoint, you don't qualify for funding from USDA. So you're above the 51%, but you don't fit in the 10% or 90% ratio of USDA. So you're in no man's land. So it's we've got these rules out there that actually hurt rural America, and people don't know about them. I just can't believe that those rules exist. And yet I've talked to senior people at USDA, and they just kind of like, well, yeah, need to change the rules, don't we? So I thank you for listening. Thank you for, these are very real issues. And I would contend to you that when you, real estate, I have no real estate background. Right now I'm a commercial real estate broker, but that's only 4 years ago. I went into this because I realized that at the end of the day, jobs are connected to business, business is connected to buildings, and buildings are connected to land. So the way you start in reviving the economic health of a community is in real estate. And because we're physical beings who have to have a physical place to work. And if we don't have that physical place, we can't start a business. We can't grow a business. Now, in our case, and I'll be quiet, is that this project was a huge success. Every apartment was rented 6 months in advance. Every one of our offices is filled. Huge success. But yet we couldn't get funding to do that. And hopefully we'll be able to get that in the next 60 to 90 days. But it's a real problem.
Well, thank you, Len, for sharing that. And we completely agree. I think that everything is interconnected. And that's partially why when we start our presentation, we start with an area that that's outside of our regulation, that we know everything works together. And we are in contact with other federal agencies because we do know that capital raising, a company just doesn't look and say, I'm going to raise from investors without considering every other option that's available. And so we do need to know where the pain points and where the gaps between what they're able to a grant or a loan through another federal agency. We don't have grants or loans available from the SEC. Where does investment capital need to fall? And are they able to fill those gaps? And I would love to hear, I don't know, and I know we're going long, so this will be my last question to you, but when you looked at your capital raising options, did you consider investment capital, or was that just so far out of the field that it's not something you look to?
So I operate from the standpoint there's only 3 ways to make money, or to get money, either from customers, which is your first preference, your second preference is a loan, and your very last preference is to sell part of your company. So, yes, I looked at investment, but as the doctor talked about earlier about how complex and difficult it is on the rules and regulations around raising capital. And I'm somebody who's involved with it. I'm on a retainer with a nonprofit in the state of Oregon around helping entrepreneurs get started. So even I'm very familiar with it, and yet I find it intimidating. And it's more the concern of, do I really want to let go of the ownership if I don't have to?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining, and thank you for sharing. That is feedback that we really need to be here and keep in top of mind.
Thanks, Lynn. Also, Lynn, I don't know if you know Roger Ariel in Lane County, but you might also reach out to them and ask them to connect you with Senator Wyden's office, because if you wrote a letter sort of explaining this like you did, and that might also be another person to just bring up the issue with from multiple areas. But let's go ahead and wrap things up. And if you have any last questions, please put them in the chat now, because what we're going to do is we're going to send you a follow-up email in a few days with slides from this workshop, both the SEC and the RAIN slides. And then we're also going to look at the questions in the chat, and no promises, but where we can, both the RAIN team, if it's something that we can legally answer, or the SEC team, if there's something they can legally answer, we'll do our best to address those, or at least save those, so we can all have those in our history and to use for future conversations. And then in a couple of days, hopefully you'll get some more outreach, but you'll at least get those slides. Want to also encourage you to check out the State of Capital report that was mentioned. I think someone from my team might be able to share the link to that real quick again. And the SEC team has invited you guys to keep the conversation going. That's a number you can reach out to them at. That's one of the mailing addresses. I think there's more in the chat. So what I love as you know, as someone who grew up in rural Oregon, was like, oh, government doesn't listen to me. Well, here's government listening to us, right? Which is great. So let's take advantage of this and share useful information that hopefully can improve the lives of entrepreneurs, right? Finally, one last pitch for our RAIN program, and this really relates to some of the conversations earlier, is yes, understanding the terminology, having financial literacy, all of these are really important issues that we often see as barriers to both managing your financial success, but also creating financial success. And so on March 31st, we are launching a free 13-week accelerator program, and it's all about learning business financials. We're gonna have a bunch of experts who have all run businesses or are CPAs or tax advisors come in and teach individual courses on different topics. You'll get to have work groups, mentor hours, and go through practical exercises with other entrepreneurs to hopefully at least get a basic level and have some of the initial tools you need to then dig into topics specifically relevant to your business. So check that out, OregonRain.org/moneymaker. We're taking applications through, I think, the 5th of March, and it's 100% free. Other than that, thank you so much. I think we're going to end the call now, but let's give a round of virtual applause to the SEC team. Thank you so much for being here, being with us, and for listening. We really appreciate it. Everyone else, have a great rest of your Wednesday.